Okay. Everyone can just take a deep breath. Father, we're unendingly grateful for getting to join here together and grateful for each person whose face is on the screen and that we're joining together in our minds and in spirit. We're grateful for all of our brothers and sisters who, some who are not able to be with us right now, and our family and friends, people we know who are away, who are traveling, who are not feeling great, and for all of us who come to you with all of our own concerns and pains and worries and things that are taking up space in our minds. We offer each one of those things to you right now, if even just for an hour and a half, 2 hours, we just release it from our mind and release it from our effort, our worry. And we know that you have it even before and while we are trying to figure out ways of sorting it. So we surrender all those things to you. And more than that, we surrender each of the different ways in which we try to achieve or gain or try to find something that we feel we're missing. All the ways in which we try to get happiness or joy or peace from different things in our lives, from different people in our lives, from different ideas we have, from different physical or material things that we have. We surrender all of those efforts to you as well. And we recognize that we are already safe in your love and already have everything that we could ever hope for being in you. And we receive what that feels like. We receive the fullness of what you've given us. All of the forgiveness, all of your love, all of your kindness, all of your joy and peace that you extend to us. We receive all that right now. And we're mindful of people in our lives who don't know this and whose lives reflect that of fear and worry and anxiety. As we think of them, we bless them. We ask them whatever way is most helpful and appropriate for them, that you would allow them to experience the knowing of who you are, the knowing of your love, the experience of what it feels like to be completely known and completely loved. We ask this week that you would allow us to be conduits and vehicles of your love and kindness, even just in small ways, that people would be able to glimpse a different way of thinking, a different way of living, a different way of being. We open ourselves to your work in and through us. We ask that you would change our minds, change our hearts where it is needed. We ask that you would help to uproot old patterns, thought patterns, and habits. And we give you our willingness for you to help us to see those so that we can become aware of them. And becoming aware of them, we can release them and surrender them. We want every bit of our thoughts and our habits to reflect who we are in you. And we give you our willingness for you to do that in us. We say thank you. We know that you have already done this and are doing it and will continue so. So we say thanks, and in Jesus' name, amen. All right. Let's see if anybody joined here. All right. Hey there, Nancy. Perfect. All right. Well, yeah, I think probably be clearing my throat a lot. Sorry about that. Yeah, I think everybody, you probably have the notes in front of you for today. And so you can just follow along like normal for those of you who are normally on Zoom, and those of us who we normally meet in person. We can just do it this way for today. Thanks to all of you for acquiescing in that way and for being on time and all of that. So yeah, mostly today, I just wanted to look at maybe it's mostly one specific tool. Of course, as I've noted, either fortunately or unfortunately, this is the last class for this class today. So there was several tools that were coming here at the end that we were going to talk about, and I just felt that maybe this would be the most helpful or appropriate for where we are right now, and having talked about what we've talked about these last few weeks. And I know a lot of you are very familiar with the Enneagram, so this will be nothing but summary in some way, but I wanted to take a moment just to talk about it because I think it's just a natural extension of the things that we've been talking about, and it provides for us a really helpful tool to actually be able to look at in a very personal way rather than in just a general way, in a very personal way, to help us be able to look at the specific ways in which we trip ourselves up by way of thought patterns, by way of habitual ways of being. So it provides us just a little bit of a lens and a tool through which to do that. And I want to try and explain it in the best way I can. Full disclosure, through my organization, they required me in one of my roles to become a certified Enneagram coach. So like full disclosure, like I use this all the time with our teams and people that we work with all over the world, and it's unendingly the most helpful tool to help people be aware of what's going on within them and help team dynamics, et cetera, et cetera. So some of the things that I wanted to put down here were ways in which I feel like I often hear people talking about it in a not very helpful kind of way. So I kind of wanted to just clear up some of those kind of stereotypes and or maybe unhelpful language that sometimes we hear around it. So that's part of what I wanted to do here anyway, even though a lot of you are already familiar with this. But first and foremost, if you have a pen and or a piece of paper or a pad right in front of you, if even a scrap of paper, just to do a quick exercise here. The most simple thing in the world, but it has a powerful feeling towards it. It provides a powerful experience or feeling. And if all of you have something like that in front of you, whichever hand is your dominant hand, put the pen in the other hand. And with the other hand, whatever it is for you, your right or left, in your non-dominant hand, write your full name in the most perfect cursive that you possibly can. Some of you probably nailed it, and yours probably looks pretty good. Mine is like the worst. Every time I do it, it just gets worse and worse. I don't know, how did y'all's turn out?
Terrible.
Terrible. Well, so we've all done that before. That's great. Thanks for that, Rex. We've all done that before. But how did that feel? How does that feel for you to write like that with that hand?
Really weird.
Yeah, really weird, right?
Very awkward.
Yeah, very awkward.
I feel like a third grader.
Who's failing the class.
Yeah, 100%. That's great. 100%. We all know exactly what that feels like. Now just do the obvious thing and put your pen back in your dominant hand and write your beautiful signature right underneath that. And how does that feel?
Very natural.
Yeah, natural. You kind of have this moment of, yes, I am an excellent writer, like I thought I was. Yeah. So what's really helpful about doing that is, and even helpful about Rex saying you feel like a third grader, is if you just imagine that there are an enormous amount of potential ways of thinking and being within you. And we all have utilized one particular, or I say a set of particular patterns of thinking and ways of acting are for a large portion of our lives. So that has become so normal, just like you're writing with your dominant hand, and every other way that is potential within you of thinking, of acting, of being, it feels so awkward. And in a way, it is like all those other parts of you have been stuck back in third grade. That was a great comment from Rex, because that's really what it's like. So whenever you're put in a situation that has you, that is asking you to act or to be or to think in a way in which you are not normally used to doing, of course, how does it feel? Super uncomfortable, super awkward, super like, I can't do this. We usually just resort to, that's not me, I can't do it, right? Of course you can. Of course it is within you. Of course, all of that potential, different ways of thinking and feeling and experiencing and et cetera, all of that is within you. We just have not practiced it. We have been so practiced dominant for whatever reasons. All the forces of our life have coalesced towards allowing us to be in a very particular way. And that is what creates what we typically call the personality structure. So we'll get more to that in a second, but I always like that exercise, because even for myself, it just reminds me, man, there are so many more giftings and so many more ways of being that would be such a gift to myself and to others if I could learn to utilize them, learn to practice them. So of course, when it comes to the Enneagram, and I'll give a little bit more background and whatnot, but just when it comes to the Enneagram, just have it in your mind. The basic idea is that every pattern, every type is within you. It's not like you only have one or you only have two, or no, it's not like that. It's like they're all within you, and we have just chosen to utilize one very particular path, and then we call that ourselves. Look at that, that's me. And like, even worse, we say things like, look how unique I am. I do this and this and this. It's like, well, it turns out, we're not that unique. But also we've just learned to utilize all of these specific fear-based coping mechanism patterns, et cetera, in a very particular way, such that it becomes a strength. And this is one of the things, of course, that you find, like with StrengthsFinder as well, if you bring that into this conversation, is that these fear-based patterns that we begin to use over and over and over, they become our strengths, of course, because we become so good at them, just like writing with your dominant hand. We would all say, that's my strong hand. Well, it's like, well, it's not. Objectively speaking, you have two strong hands. So you just put all the emphasis on this one. So you think this is your dominant or strong hand, etc. So here, we'll just look at kind of what I have at the top. This is kind of how I like to think about it. And it kind of helps to remove some of the ways in which people use it. Again, we'll get to that. But so it's almost like the Enneagram is kind of like a picture of, take a look at the dynamic intricacies of how you enslave yourself so that you can change your mind. If we start thinking about it that way, I think it is helpful. Of course, let me just say here, I agree with whatever that may be in all of our minds, that there are some latent aspects of us, of our, if you want to call your soul self and or yourself at birth, that predicate you towards a particular way of being. So not everything is pure conditioning. This is where we say naturing and nurturing, nature and nurture. So sure, I'm just not going to talk about any of the nature bit, because who knows what percentage that is anyway, and I'm not going to worry about that. For the most part, what we're talking about is that which we have nurtured, that which we have developed. So from the group that I work with on the Enneagram stuff, they're called IEQ9. I'll talk about them more later. They're the most excellent. I'll talk about them later. But one of the main things they say is the Enneagram shows you how small you have made your own box and how to get out of it. And I really like that, because I don't know about for all of you, but some of these things we've been talking about these last few weeks, I often find and feel like I have imprisoned myself in particular ways. I often feel like the particular set of habitual responses that I've created, while I can say within them, yeah, sure, I feel strong, I know what I'm doing, it's so practiced, et cetera, but it's the moment that I get in a situation that requires a different response from me, I feel like I'd imprisoned myself, and I'm no longer able to act as freely and with consistency in a particular way. But then more than that, these are the personality structure as a whole is the particular way in which we've kind of enclosed ourselves in a particular way of being and thinking and acting that is really unnecessary. It really can open back up, and there's tons of other ways of perceiving and feeling and knowing that are available to us if we just give our willingness. So I had these two italic points were more to just try and release some of the stereotypes that I know can often be around them. So I don't mean this to be in any way judgmental, but these are normally the comments that I get from people about it, whether positive or negative. But so I wrote, anyone who's viewing this as a fun way of seeing our own uniqueness, which I put would be immensely ironic, because just we're together, these are precisely the ways in which we have taught ourselves to cope with fear, anxiety, et cetera, et cetera. So to then turn that back around, so it's like our egoic structure 101, and it's not our true self 101. I mean, you know what I mean? It's like I won't say 100%, but I'll say almost fully an egoic structure that we then turn around and say, look how interesting and wonderful and unique my egoic structure is, and that's where I say it's just immensely ironic that a lot of the Enneagram discussion has turned it to be, I am interesting and unique because I am this type and this subtype, and I do this and this and this, and so that's unnecessary. Or justifying why I do certain things. A lot of the talk that I hear is, oh, I act that way, I did that because I'm a whatever type, and that's not helpful either, because once again, you're just reinforcing your little small box, which is very unnecessary. Or trying to identify someone else and putting them in a personality box, all of that is completely missing the point. So I think we all know all of that, but I just wanted to state that. So this tool reveals the ego dynamics, so the fear-based thinking, the coping mechanisms, ways of gaining control in our world, addictive tendencies, In short, the Sark's mind, everything we've been talking about, so that by seeing them, we can grow in awareness and take every fear-based thought pattern captive and change our minds, becoming more integrated. And I put less enslaved to thoughts and patterns or thought patterns, and more free and peaceful, more able to live from the Christ mind and walking with spirit, right? So basically, to me, this is just a tool that enables us to do what Paul has been asking us to do. Learn to take off the old self, learn to walk with spirit, and put on the new self. And that's what this tool can help us to do it if we want it to. Let me pause right there. Does anyone have anything they want to add to that? If you have other thoughts or any comments? If not, great. I'll just keep going. So number one, I've already said this, so I don't really need to say it again, but to me, it's helpful to think about it. Like, of course we say personality structure, and not to get too technical, but what we really mean is character fixation or personality fixation. And the reason we say it that way, because again, personality and personality profile, et cetera, in our culture, I mean, these days, those are normally words that are utilized for someone's, however you'd like to say it, their either given or their constructed uniqueness, which is all well and fine. And I'm not trying to oppose, the particular, unique ways we each show up. And we'll talk about that in a bit. I think there's just a different and more helpful way of talking about that. But so again, it's not a box either. So I've noticed that a lot of people have resistance to this because they don't like being associated with a number or a word or a box or anything like that. And that's very understandable. I mean, just 100%. But the good news is that it doesn't have to be that way, and you don't have to think about it that way. And we'll get to it more, but it's an incredibly dynamic system. There's no real way in which you're just one number. Of course, we say, and I'll get there, you lead from a particular type, from a particular vantage point. But it's so dynamic. There's so many other things at play. Nobody need worry about getting themselves locked into a box or anything like that. So number two, it's not a static number, whatever number you think you are or subtype. It's a dynamic process of integrating the use and the gifts of all the numbers. So I didn't want to get into like the history of the Enneagram, though it has a very long history. Like we have several images of several of a 9-pointed figure in several of the same kind of numerological drawing, like you see there, from the Desert Fathers, from Evagrius of Ponticus. For those of you who are familiar, they were utilizing a nine facet framework for understanding virtues and vices. And that's what they were utilizing for their pastoral care. So this was used as a pastoral tool, even within the Christian tradition way back, we're talking 5th, 6th, 7th centuries. We have Philo mentioning the 9-facet wisdom gram, like that, a chart. So that'd be 1st century. And then, of course, we have some people even before that mentioning it. But then, of course, I didn't want to go into this because it's long and complex and very interesting. But it begins to take shape from about 13th, 14th century on. It really begins to take shape as it is right now. And it's always utilized. I say always, I'll say on the whole, it has been utilized for spiritual awareness, for the awareness of what it is that is tripping us up. It has never been utilized as for anything else really. So in Greek, of course, Ennea is 9. We all know that. And Gramma can be utilized for something that is written, something that is drawn, or something like a chart. So however you want to think about that is fine. I will say we have one of the early thoughts on this. I think it's more feasibly from the 13th century, is that a part of the Christian wisdom tradition called the Hermetic tradition had has a drawing of this 9-faceted way of thinking about structures that correlate into character fixation personality structures. And they had behind the drawing, they have a drawing of the face of Christ. So within the wisdom tradition, the way that in the Christian tradition, the way that this has been thought of is the fullness of Christ, the fullness of who Christ is all of these in all of their giftingness and all of the ways in which they show up. And of course, that's why for all of us, we innately have all of them within ourselves or within our mind, however you'd like to say that. And we normally just show up in kind of like small slices of it. You know what I mean? Whereas like growing into the fullness of the mind of Christ or of Christ, this gives just a little bit of a picture, a little bit of a pattern of what that could look like, of just being able to give you little glimpses of things that maybe you haven't thought of before. Like, and that's what I'll keep saying. I'm not going to hold this in any way like this is necessary or anything like that. Absolutely not. It's just helpful. It's heuristic is what it is. And I'll just give you an example for me. Like, it helps to kind of see the fullness of what is possible, and not just the human experience, but this is where we say growing into the image of Christ. For example, where I find myself within the structure here, there are several places along, actually a lot of them, that I don't think much of. And in fact, I never identify myself with those, or I hadn't previous to work with this. So those were dormant potentials within me, 100%. And several of them, the moment that I was challenged to start living from within these potentials, several of them became very clear that one, it was awkward at the beginning, needless to say, but it became very clear that these were key things that I was missing in my own experience, and that I had shut down. One of them is from a particular, I don't want to just like name numbers or anything like that, but from a particular direction of a type. They operate with a whole lot of joy. That's just kind of their gift to the world. It's just an enormous amount of joy. And that was one that had been dormant or latent within myself. And so beginning to tap in to some of those and just kind of having a picture of what it would look like to tap into some of those, the increased possibility of a more well-rounded way of being, but we can just say a more Christ-like way of being begins to actually just not just take shape, but even just gives you a picture of it. Because like, honestly, like even for me, if somebody says, okay, Ryan, like you need to be more like Christ. Okay, what does that mean? Like in what way, okay, I'll try and be more loving, I'll try and be more peaceful, whatever. So this gives just a lot of specificity to it, and which I think is helpful just as a kind of a heuristic tool of being able to see what I didn't normally see before. So let me just continue in that bold part of A. The Enneagram is a chart of consciousness that proclaims unity and wholeness as our ultimate reality. Again, the Christ mind identifies how we have strayed from that essential truth and provides a roadmap home. Rather than putting us into a box, it identifies the often invisible box of beliefs in which we already live so that we can finally break out of it, a way of working out our freedom. Okay, I put that part, a way of working out our freedom with fear and trembling. That's how I was thinking about it. But it helps us to better articulate and understand the box that we have put ourselves in. If I can say it this way, like our sarkic box, the sarks of the sark self. And what I find very helpful about that is that if somebody just says you're living according to your flesh, it's like, okay, sure, I guess so, in whatever ways I do that. But if you find yourself associated on here, it is going to tell you with a ton of precision exactly how you're living in your false self. And that's what's so helpful about it, because it just shows it right to you. Whatever it is that you were missing just shows that, okay, that's why I tend towards this. That's why I trip up here. And some of us have noticed that, different people struggle with different things than we do, don't they? And like, we've all noticed that. And, of course, all of us being more empathic and aware, I'm just extending that to all of us. We'd say something like, why is it that particular set of struggles that person has, I just do not have those struggles? Like, that is foreign to me, and then vice versa. Why is it that this thing that I'm struggling with so much, not everybody around me seems to think it's a problem, etc. Well, it's like, yeah, here we go. So this is where the
the Enneagram will just help just to kind of show you these are all the things that may or may not be tripping you up. And then, of course, it gives you a bit of a roadmap, a bit of a path to step out of those and to gain more wholeness. So again, just as a heuristic tool. So then B, the Enneagram figure. The figure within the circle, the numerological angles, is a circle inscribed by 9 points. We won't go into all this. It's all of immense significance. Like, it's really brilliant. It's kind of hard to just talk about it in a simple way because it's immensely brilliant the way that it all goes together. One would begin to think that they had help in some way, beginning to put it together because it works together too well. And that's what some of you know, but that's why there's a lot of research going on around the Enneagram, a lot of properly done research. And it's precisely because it's kind of a mystery how it works so well, because and in all different countries, all cultures, and this has been utilized, especially by IEQ9. That's some of the research that they're doing. So it's not just in the Western world. They're doing a lot of research in Africa, doing a lot of research in Eastern Asia, and it's the exact same for everybody. And it's just immensely helpful for everybody. So of course, a big question is like, why? Like, how on earth is this so accurate and so helpful? So that's interesting in and of itself. On the most basic level, each point represents a different archetypal personality type. So that's just at its basic level, and that's what the names are. The circle in the diagram represents reality, of course, the totality, which includes the essential oneness of all of life, as well as the intrinsic wholeness of each individual within that greater oneness. So needless to say, it operates all from a very spiritual perspective. Okay, let me pause there just in case anybody has any thoughts or anything you want to add. And for those of you who know a lot about the Enneagram, feel free to add whatever I'm missing here or something else that you think is helpful for everybody to hear. If not, I'll just keep going. So number 3. So I already said this, but this is just really crucial to know. So every person is all 9 numbers, but here we'll get more than that. But we have learned to rely on 1 or 2 or 3 primary methods of escaping pain, getting our needs met, coping with anxiety, etc. But in truth, but really, there are 27 numbers, and that's to me, that's the best way of saying it. But then it gets more than that, because actually there's more like 486 if you take into account the wings, the line movements, plus the integration steps from several directions. If you take all that into account, there's more like 486. But then, of course, there's actually a little bit more line movement than you can do than that. So actually it's 486 to the power of 3 in a way. So in fact, that's where some of the uniqueness will come. If I can say it this way, it's almost like uniqueness in how we've boxed ourselves in, uniqueness of how we're stuck. So if we want to brag about that uniqueness, no problem, let's go for it. But also just know that we are the same in so many ways. And in fact, the patterns here reveal that we are all the same in so many ways. But we uniquely, because of our unique, biographies, we uniquely box ourselves in very particular ways. And I say uniquely kind of tongue in cheek also, because again, like we noted, there's not yet been someone, who's actually gone through this in a good way that I know, who has not found some deep resonance with it. So patterns are there. Okay, so the reason why that's important, though, to say something about the 27 is because I think most people are not aware of that. Most people just operate from the 9, and which is no problem. You can get a lot out of the 9. But when you get to the 27, it helps you to recognize the way in which your instinctual habits, your instinctual drives are also correlating with this and greatly affect how the particular number comes out. So that in that way, it's super helpful. And even more than that, there's one particular subtype from each number that is almost the exact opposite of the number that it represents, which is also very interesting. And this is also where a lot of mistyping stuff occurs, and a lot of people saying, I was told I was a whatever, but it just didn't resonate with me, so this thing doesn't work for me, etc. It's like, well, yeah, like there is a subtype of each one that operates, I won't say the exact opposite, but almost almost opposite from what their number is. And that's very interesting. And there's of course a reason for that. But so there's a lot of things once you start to realize it, how helpful it is to understand some of that. So number 4, we don't say, or I'll just speak for myself, and this is like with IEQ 9 and like the practice of utilizing it again for the resistance that people have, et cetera, et cetera. We don't say I am a 3 or whatever. We say something like I primarily lead as a whatever and subtype, or I primarily show up as a whatever and subtype. And the reason why that's more helpful is because, again, when you're talking with somebody else as well, you don't come up and say, oh yeah, you would say that you're a 9, right? That's never helpful. Nobody ever appreciates somebody boxing them in with a number like that, or just painting the picture of you know, I know you're going to do this because you're a 3, you know, et cetera, et cetera. Nobody appreciates that. So it's a better practice, I think. And I found as well to be able to say, I can see, you know, the way in which you show up in the way that you lead from a whatever perspective. You know, it's a much more kind of kind way of saying it, but also it respects that they are not that number. So just we're together. This is the other thing about knowing, you know, as Christians, how to talk about this in a better way is not naming people as this, because this is their old self. This is largely a function of their old self, right? So we know who they are in truth. So one of the reasons for myself that I don't try and name somebody as a box of a number, and I don't put myself in a box of a number, because that's not who I am in truth, and that's not who they are in truth, right? So wanting to see them as their true self, and also recognize the way in which you have taught yourself to show up or lead in this world is through the particular lens of, say, a 6 and a subtype of a et cetera, et cetera. You know what I mean? Okay, let me pause there once again. Any comments or thoughts on that? Okay, great. Yeah, no problem. I'll just keep going here. So needless to say, well, I say that I really struggled with, I mean, a lot of you are very familiar with a lot of these dynamics, but for those of you who aren't, I really struggled with how to kind of show some of the brilliance of this. So I made a list here of, this is just some, I would say this is about 60% of what you can do with this. But so just to kind of give you a feel, what we're talking about here, this is 5 and A. I'm sorry, somebody want to say something? Okay, I didn't know if somebody was saying something. Okay, so 5 and A. So just so you can kind of get a feel for it. So a properly done awareness of the subtypes in an Enneagram process would give you access to an awareness of what we call the type and the subtype. So that's the primary number and the subtype, which relates to the instincts, which gives you an awareness of the core patterns and motivations that drive you. So let me just pause there. This is why you do what you do. So another thing that's helpful about the Enneagram, the way that it works, is that it's not interested in what you do. It's not interested at all in your actions, if I can say it that way, because that's irrelevant. We can jerry-rig ourselves to do anything at any given time. What it's concerned with is your motivations. And that again is why this is so helpful. And I have 1 or 2 examples as to how that plays out. But again, so this is really getting at what's in your mind, your motivations. And then of course, conflict. So how you handle conflict, that is enormously helpful. Of course, the triggers, you know, things that trigger you. So it helps to name all that for you. So of course, all you do whenever you start reading this is, yeah, I know. Because all it does is name everything that you already know, right? But it just kind of shows it to your face to let you really be able to see it. So like it'll name your triggers. So it'll name things that people say and things that people do that really trigger you. And of course you'll say, I know on all of them, but it's super helpful because it shows you the pattern, and it shows you, like, then you can say, oh, now I see why that person always bothers me, etc. So it just shows you all that. So again, it's like, it's just trying to help you have a maximum awareness so that when you go throughout your day, you can respond to things in a very different way rather than reacting to them. So of course it shows you, yeah, why you get frustrated and whatnot. it shows you what is often called the core wound, which is irrelevant language. It's just to say there normally is something that is a fundamental hinge point in our life that operates like a core negative belief, something that really operates. See, see a wonderful animal there somewhere. And okay, let me keep going there. It shows a vice. So each number and subtype has a very particular vice. And that's also really helpful. And I'm sure you already know what yours is, but in case you don't, it kind of helps to name it. Because for some of them, it's actually not as obvious as you might think. And in that way, it helps to kind of give you this little bit of a light bulb of, okay, I can see all the ways in which that plays out in my life. And now I know what the root of that is, like what it's coming from. And now I can better work with it. Then, of course, it shows you what in the tradition has been a key virtue with each one of the types and subtypes, which is also really wonderful because it shows you what a bit of some of what you have so practiced. And if we want to say innately, what innately comes through, but also what you have so practiced, there is something in there that is a kernel, like I was going to say a pearl or a diamond. There is something in there that is part of what will enable you and what will be an antidote to the vice, what will enable you to be able to see whatever it is that you're doing in a different way. And then also in the particular, not in all of the, in the IEQ9 tradition, there's what's called a holy idea, which is also beautiful. And because it's a primary, for lack of better words, idea that again helps to work towards your liberation. It's super helpful. Okay, centers of intelligence. I think I have something. Okay, I have something about this here in a bit. So let me just skip over that one. Centers of expression. So this is the way in which you respond to something, to a situation that is either stressful or frustrating, etc. And it shows you kind of exactly the way that you do it from either your thinking center, your feeling center, your action center, etc. And it kind of shows you, it also shows you the way in which you respond, as in, do you withdraw? Do you go without? Do you disseminate? Like, what is the pattern that you utilize? So it shows you that as well, which is helpful. Of course, stress patterns. So it'll show you exactly. And this is where it's uncannily correct. For everybody I know and everybody I've worked with this, it's uncannily correct on when you are stressed, what do you begin to think about and what do you begin to do? And it just names it for you. And it's always correct. And then by default in the other direction, it part of the lines and part of the growth aspect is that it allows you to see if you were to grow towards this particular direction, this particular type, that is where kind of a keystone shift for you could be, like a keystone set of awarenesses, gifts, etc. That if you took your focus and said, I'm going to really focus on these particular traits or whatever, that enables, engenders an enormous amount of growth. And that is really has been the case. Everybody that I've worked with in this, again, that's uncannily correct as well on how on how appropriate each one of the developmental lines are for people. Of course, conflict style. Most of us don't need help knowing how and why we get in conflict, but it's actually super helpful to kind of know. What's super helpful is to know how your spouse reacts in conflict and how your spouse reacts in stress, because it just names it. It just names it. And I'll just be honest, like for me and Justine, this whole thing, when we were taught the Enneagram by, we had a coach who walked us through kind of like a marriage counseling utilizing the Enneagram. It was mind-blowing in the ways in which we just said, I know the whole time, but it was just light bulb after light bulb after light bulb. That's why she does what she does. That's why he does what he does. That's why he responds to me this way when I say this, et cetera, et cetera. So the more awareness you have in your relationship, the more ability you have to be able to, one, preempt, you know how that person is going to respond if you respond in this way this particular time. So you circumambient it. You learn ways of creatively working with one another that helps develop each other rather than trigger each other. And that for me and like our relationship, I'll just be honest, like this has been the most helpful tool we have ever utilized for our marriage and such. Yeah, centers of structure. Yeah, okay. Strain levels, communication level, feedback style, wing influences, lines of gross development, lines of freedom, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, it's just to kind of show like it's kind of infinite. Like you can be as deep and as work with this however deep you want to, or you cannot and work with it in just like one direction, and whatever you want to do is great. Or if you don't want to, that's fine too. But it just was to show that it has an enormous amount of depth to it. So I don't really need to go through these resistance statements, but these are the things I hear the most. And it's just helpful sometimes to just name them. And so I hear a lot of people say something like, it didn't work for me. I tried it. I tried to know, or like the test didn't work for me. And so, by the way, I'll say something about that in a bit, but tests are normally a bad idea. There's only one test that I feel confident in having anybody take, but most of them are pretty lacking, and that's part of the problem, part of the mistyping problem. But the other part of the problem is that it does what you want it to. I mean, just to say it, like if you give it your attention and you give it your willingness, it will 100% work for you. I mean, it shows you so many things about yourself. There's no way it could not work for you. But of course, if you're thinking that it's it should only do one thing, and one number should have named all who I am 100%. It's like all of that is just a misconception. It's just a misunderstanding of what it is. Because again, that's one of the things I hear. Like somebody said that I was this number, but when I started reading about that number, I was like, no, maybe like 20% on that number, And I always want to respond like, yeah, exactly, because you're all the numbers, and you work, and the way you are, you've probably very carefully crafted your personality structure in a way, your character fixation in a way that it takes from here and here and here and here and here. So you need a much more dynamic approach to be able to see all the things that are going on, right? So again, it's just being able to recognize what it is and what it isn't. And of course, I often hear, I can't figure out what I am. Like, I tried to read all of them, and I just, none of them really get me, et cetera, et cetera. It's like, yeah, that's all fine. I get what people are saying in that way, but also not. Again, it's just a misconception, because that's not the way it works. I have a friend who, and I'll say for myself too, but I have a friend who I could even say for them that they're at least 3 primary numbers. I mean, like you can see it in the way that they act and whatnot. And that doesn't mean that they don't lead from a particular number. I feel that they do. And I think most people feel like there is a primary leading from a primary number, but that's kind of irrelevant. If you identify, key patterns from several different numbers, great, then start working with all of them. Because the quicker you work with all of them, the quicker you get back to full awareness and full use of all of the things that has laid dormant within you. Then, of course, I hear several people say something like, I'm fine as I am. I don't have any patterns to work through. I already know all of that, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. And those people, you just say respectfully, great, and you walk away. I always have to remind myself of this. So this is really important. I think this is where all the resistance comes from. You can rest assured your self-created, your self-created identity, so your fear-based identity, feels 100% threatened by the Enneagram, and it should. Because if you gain awareness of what it is doing, all of its power dissipates, and it knows that. And I know we're talking about the thought clusters and or the ways in which we have the thought patterns in our mind as if they have consciousness. It's irrelevant whether we want to say it like that or not, though that does actually seem to be a very safe way of saying it, because it actually does seem that way, such that there does seem to be a way in which these particular patterns can feel threatened. And even if any of us have experience trying to shift the way that we dominantly perceive and or act in the world, I think we've all experienced what feels like a lot of shutdown and or resistance to particular things. So I'll just say in general, I think it's pretty safe to say all of us probably should experience some form of resistance if you start working with the Enneagram or any other any other tool that you work with, really anything. I mean, silence. See, that's where we could have said this from the beginning of class, because if any of you felt any bit of resistance to doing silence and centering prayer, 100% you can bet that that's your personality structure. It knows absolutely that that is the beginning of the end of itself. The moment that you start to pull back your fingers and or the power that you've given to it, it's like, no, listen, look at me, etc. 100% that's what it does. So not just the Enneagram, any tool or any process that you use or spiritual discipline, etc. I think you'll notice, and you probably already have noticed, you feel an enormous amount of resistance, such that you'll start saying things like, I don't need to do that today. 3 minutes is enough. I don't need to do 20 minutes, et cetera, et cetera. And we all do those things. I do it too. I catch myself regularly, like almost every day when I sit down to do my centering prayer meditation stuff. There's some voice that goes up and says, 1 minute today's fine. Like, we don't have to do much more than that. It's just like, it's almost like clockwork. And it's just resistance, which is completely fine. So yeah, let me give an example of how I've found this helpful, but let me pause there. Does anyone have any thoughts, comments so far? Okay, cool. If not, I'll keep going. 5, example of why this is helpful. So like I said a second ago, one of the ways in which I like to explain this to somebody, a lot of you already know all of this, so pardon that, but I like to explain it by way of why coming to know motivations is so crucial and so helpful, especially for Christians. Like, this is what makes this tool so valuable for us, is because take as an example the type 2, and not dealing with subtypes or anything, but just in general, the type 2 is generally labeled something like the considerable helper. It's considerate helper, or just the helper. And so the reason I choose this example is because these people on the face value, in terms of their actions, like if you look at it from the surface level, they're like awesome Christians. I mean, they're the people we praise all the time, and rightly so. I mean, and by way of their actions, they are the people who I wrote some things. Oh no, I didn't. The positives. They are unendingly thoughtful. They will bring you flowers, food when you're sick. They will make sure that that they thought of you on their birthday. They're just unendingly thoughtful and considerate and helping people, right? And they are there every time the doors are open to serve or help or anything. You know what I mean? We all know people like this. And I have very specific people in my family who are like this. And they're wonderful, wonderful, wonderful human beings because of this. But now you get to the motivations, and that's where you start to recognize that there's a little bit of a different story that's going on. Now, it doesn't negate anything that they've been doing, but you just start to realize that perhaps the motivation that they've been doing it from is slightly different. And even for them, like it's the same with every type. I'm just using this as an example, but like I know several people who are this type, and they were kind of surprised, and kind of not, but kind of surprised. Not surprised is not the word. They were they met face to face with what they knew to be true. They just didn't want to face. And it's quite simply that at the bottom of a type 2 is the fear of being unloved, the fear of being rejected. And so I wrote all of their lavish service, their acts of kindness, they're going out of their way, they're sacrificing themselves for you or for a cause, is largely a dynamic of, and one of 4 things. I mean, there's more things. I didn't want it to be one thing. So 4 primary things that often come up. I only deserve to be loved because I am loving, right? That is a core motivation. In order to get what I need to give others what they need. And because the thought is, if I can give to everybody what they need, they will be as thoughtful to me as I am to them. And of course, that never goes that way. And it always ends with a lot of resentment. Number 3, at all costs, I need to be liked and appreciated, right? And the best way to be liked by everybody is to be thoughtful and to be considerate, right? So it's a way of achieving these goals, and they have it down to a science. And number 4, I am the one who can save you. You have a problem. I am the solution, and I will save you from whatever it is that's going on with you. So the core vice of a 2, oddly enough, is pride. And it's really funny because they show up in the world with an enormous amount of non-pride, an enormous amount of love, of thinking of others, etc. But the core right underneath all of that is pride, which is and fear, but fear is with all of them. But pride, because it's, I don't need any help, I'm fine. It's you who need help, and I'm your savior, and I'm here to help you, etc. That's the narrative. That's the story that is told. Of course, layers deeper than that. That's not what's going on, but you get what I'm saying. So I put that there because the reason that's helpful, and this is from the words of twos that I know, people who lead from the two type that I know, and it's that they come to this realization that I believed all the right things. And I did all the right things, like in terms of Christianity, and like all of these I'm talking about, they're all within, a Christian church, etc. And so like I believed all the right things, I did all the right things, and then come to find out I was doing all of it from a non-gospel motivation, or rather from a fear-based motivation, or from a sarx self motivation. So if you think about it that way, you can just think about like if the personality structure is standing upon this foundation. And then you ask the question, is the foundation the Christ self that you are, or is the foundation the sarkic self, the old self? And if it turns out that it's the sarkic self, which it is, because it's fear-based, and you knock that out, then the whole thing collapses, right? And that's the fear. Like that's the fear of these structures that we create, these narratives about ourselves that we create. What we're afraid of is to get to the core and realize that it's not true. And then the whole thing collapses. And of course the fear, you can just feel it with me, like everything. And now notice the paradox and the irony. Everything that I thought I was, everything that I made of myself turns out not to be true. Now that should be immense good news, right? That should be like so much good news. Turns out you're way more beautiful and wonderful and loving and whatever than you ever thought you were. But of course, that's not how our little minds interpret it. We interpret it as, oh no, I have just lost myself, right? It's like, no, you haven't. You have gained your true self. But of course, your experience of it will feel like loss. And I'll just speak from my own experience on this. Like the moment 4 or 5 years ago, roughly, when I started working really seriously with the Enneagram and like taking it really serious and trying to pay attention to all these little narratives that I had created within my I as Ryan kind of identity construction. And the moment that I started doing that, I started to realize, just like I said, I started to realize that the primary props that were holding up particular ways in which I thought I was, both successes and failures, but particular my traits, my talents, my, ways of being in the world, et cetera, et cetera. I started to realize that they were not coming from the true self heart, who I really am, as I thought they were. Turns out they were coming from a very different place, a very fear-based place, right? And the moment that I started to give willingness to say, okay, then, like, I'm not going to allow that action to be based upon this motivation, right? So now I had to consciously start thinking about whenever this action, whenever I needed to do this action. It was like writing with your left hand. You had to like think about what exactly it is I'm doing, why I'm doing it, et cetera, et cetera. And then I started to realize that several things that I was doing, I wanted nothing to do with anymore, right? Because they were based upon a particular way of viewing myself that I was no longer okay with. I'll just say one here. Like, one of the primary narratives that I had going on for myself was I had a core fear of being a failure in whatever way that looks like, and a core fear of feeling like I'm useless, like worthless. Worthless is really the word, but I would normally say it like I had a core feel of feeling like I was useless, right? So of course, what did I do? What did my mind do? My character fixation, my personality structure, et cetera. It said, no problem, we can solve that. We can find about 1,000 ways in which you're going to be super useful to everybody around you, right? So I found these 1,000 ways, and I was unbelievably useful to everybody, right? I learned new skills. I learned new ways of doing things. I learned what people needed around me, and I learned what I needed to do to be able to help them, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then I realized at one point, I mean, when I started doing this, I realized like I am killing myself all day, every day, because I want to feel useful, right? And like I mean, really, like I'm losing sleep over it. My health was going down the drain, et cetera, et cetera. Why? Because I had so many things in my life. I had counted that time. It was like 13, I think it was 13 different avenues of which I was trying to be useful, right? And it's like that wasn't enough. Like if another one came up and somebody said, "Hey, Ryan, could you do this?" Of course, I'll say, "Yeah, sure, of course." If somebody asked me, "When do you have time to do that?" I'll say, "Don't worry, I'll figure it out," you know? And then I started to realize when I started paying attention where this was coming from, of course, a lot of the motivation at the beginning, is largely intentional. Like I had to say no. And I had to say, my usefulness does not come from doing this and this and this. My worth, my value, et cetera, does not come from doing this and this and this. So why am I doing them? Yeah, I was just doing them to get some praise from the person and whatever. They weren't giving that to me anyway. So I had loads of resentment towards them for not giving that to me anyway. So, okay, I dropped that, got down to about like 3 core things. And even there, what I realized was about 2 of those 3 core things I was still doing because I thought I would be more valuable if I did them. And it was really hard to drop them. Like, this is where I say, like, there's nothing easy about this, unless they're things that you really don't want to do. But these were things that it was clear to me that like they had so enmeshed with me. I thought they were part of my vocation. Like I thought that they were what I was here to do, you know? They were so enmeshed with like, you know, kind of my goals and all that, that when I finally realized it, I realized that no, like pretty much the reason I'm doing virtually everything except for one thing that I could find. And so I really brought it down from 13 things to one thing that I was doing. Well, so then what happened, I'll make this short here, but then what happened was this other voice came up in my mind and said, "Ryan, you used to be so helpful and so productive. You used to be doing 13 things. Now you're just doing one thing. You are super lazy," right? So then that voice comes up. And so now I have to deal with that, right? Because like, we're not used to receiving value and worth and the truth of who we are with that has nothing to do with what we do, has nothing to do with our performance, either success or failure, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, I just share that. And I hope if that's helpful in any way, there's a lot more I could share there, because I've had several instances where I've just completely broke down because it is painful to have spent so much time on something to come to realize you were doing it for all the wrong reasons, right? But of course, what I find, and I'm sure what y'all have found also, is that spirit utilizes everything and will take whatever it is that you had been using as an idol, for lack of better words, and will turn it into an immense gift. And that's what happens every single time. But of course, it means, and what it felt like is that it meant losing a little part of myself as Ryan. And in truth, I was gaining my true self, but I didn't see it that way. I felt it more like I'm being stripped away of all these things that I really wanted to do or loved or whatever. And that's, of course, not what was happening. That was just my interpretation of it. Anyway, that was just a little bit of my experience there. Is there any, let me just pause here, any comments or thoughts?
I'll
Final
comment.
thought. Oh yeah, go ahead.
I'll comment as always.
Please.
You know, and backtracking into what you were saying earlier, you know, just the red flag for me that's just waving in my face is, you know, I guess because of age and more experience with the same people, is that I put people in boxes. I have myself in a box, but man, I really keep my siblings, and you know, you judge and say, okay, this person's this way and it's going to react this way. And that's the box they're living in my mind.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I
That's very well
possibly
said.
could let them out of the box.
Yeah. Yeah. That's very well said. Thank you for that, Nancy. Yeah, it's so true. And like, this is where this goes in tandem with, you know, the blessing practice that we've been doing and such, because it really takes a little bit of conscious effort, like writing with your left hand or right hand, whatever it is for you, to release somebody from their box and to start to see them not as they've shown themselves to you, because keep in mind, and however somebody shows themselves to you, that's who they think they really are, right? So any bit of critique around their personality structure that they've constructed, they don't know that that's not really who they are, right? So they're going to receive that with an enormous amount of resistance. Of course they are. So this is where, like, of course, I know all of us are smart and kind, and most people don't know that there's a foundation and a truth of who they are that is outside of, that stands outside of, or however you'd like to say that, outside of this construction that we have created of ourselves. And and that is immense good news. But to the structure of who we think we are, it feels like a threat. And this is what I think is really interesting. Like, if we had more time to talk about it, this is why I think a lot of people perceive the gospel as a threat. It's because they know, like, a part of them knows, I'll say their unconscious knows, that it is indeed a threat to their false sense of self, and or to the old self that they've created, because that old self it has to die with Christ, and it has died with Christ, and it has to die with Christ daily. But that is not only easier said than done, but most people perceive that as, so you're telling me that I'm not who I think I am? You're telling me that all this that I've done in my life to gain whatever, success, whatever, that all that is not really who I am? You're telling me that my CV, my resume is not who I am? I've worked so hard for that. I've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars for that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You get what I'm saying? Like, we're so tightly enmeshed with these narratives that we have about ourselves that we cannot even imagine ourselves without them, right? This is where we said last week, the title of a book by Byron Katie, which is a brilliant book, called Who Would You Be Without Your Story? And it goes along these lines. Of course, it's not as gospel focused as maybe we'd want it to be, but it goes along these lines just to show all of us that we're all very attached to our stories, to our old selves.
Core beliefs,
core beliefs, as Paul tells us.
And so, Ryan, can I say one more thing about this presentation? So my box that I'm in, I don't care for numbers. So I'm not a numbers person. So this has a lot of numbers in it.
Yeah.
And so I immediately text and says, is this numerology? And so the response on my phone was that, no, this is not, that's based on some, entirely different thing. But, that was my little red flag, that this leads us. That's not where this leads us. So,
100%.
If you want to address that, and.
Ryan, if I could just chime in a little bit, and
please.
The Enneagram is, of course, extremely complex, as you've illustrated, and these are used in a multitude of ways. And one thing that I have found, and this is a very simplistic, fundamental level, and I would never go up to somebody and say, hey, you're a 2 or you're a 7 or whatever.
Yeah.
But I work with people and I associate with people who, to me, are quintessentially identifiable. Broad terms of the 9 point, not trying to deal with the more complex levels. But what I have found useful for me personally is that when I know that a lady I'm working with is a very strong 1 on the end, then I can better relate to her in terms that are not offensive and that are more productive. If that makes any sense to you.
Oh, it makes perfect sense.
I know that she is going to take 5 times longer than the other people I work with, because she's going to do everything she can to make sure that she makes no mistake and that everything is absolutely perfect. And identifying that, knowing that going in, it helps me to be less frustrated. I won't say I
Mhm.
avoid all frustration because
Yeah.
hey, I'm an 80% person. You know, if it's 80% good, we're already wasting time. 110% person. But knowing that and accepting that, not trying to judge her or change her, just utilizing that
Mm.
knowledge base, I found to be very helpful.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you for saying that, Lanny. I'll just piggyback on what you've said there and say um, an idea similar to that has been helpful to me is, we part of the skill of learning to love others is learning to appreciate how they feel that love, how they most want to be loved, and learning to meet them where they're at and not trying to change them, like you said, Lanny. I think this is where, we have the words, love others as yourself. In terms of the Enneagram, we'd probably want to say, love others according to how is most appropriate and helpful for them, right? Because not everybody wants to be, in the same way, Lanny, like you said, I like people to say particular things to me, right? But I've learned, just like you said, that if I say those same things to some of the other personality construction people, they do not take them well and they do not appreciate them and they do not come across as a way of being kind or loving, right? So you really take time, like you're saying, Lanley. I mean, there's so much in it because it's like we really take time to learn what the other person is like. And of course, it's their old self, but we meet them where they're at and you learn what it is, why they function the way they do, what motivates them, et cetera, et cetera. And not only does it help you to learn what not to say to them, it helps you to learn how not to trigger them. But even better, on the positive side, it helps you to know how to compliment them and how to make sure that they hear you say, the way in which you did that paper or that task, it was so helpful for all of us. I so appreciated the way that you thought about all of these different angles, and it took you 3 weeks to do it, but you thought of everything and it went so smoothly and it was perfect. And I so appreciate that. It's like, there's so much thoughtfulness to that, and that's just really taking the time to learn what people are like who are around you and whatnot. And again, like, it's a very careful balance of like not pigeonholing them or not putting them in a box. But what I found, just like you said, Lanny, we did this with our colleagues in Malawi. And what I found, the exact opposite happens. What happens is people start to learn how to appropriately respond to each other. And of course, learn what triggers you, learn what style of conflict you best operate with. And you basically learn how to operate with people in a way in which is mutually appreciative. But then what happens is people start to recognize that the way that you do that, I don't normally think to do that, but I can see that that's super helpful. So I can start to do that also. So again, it's a process of mutual growth and development. And I'll say, I have tons of examples on this and I'm trying to keep my examples to a minimum, but like this for me and Ben as well, this has been a large part of our ability to work well together. And I'm a so Ben is my brother, for those who don't know. This helped us times 1,000 to be able to work well together, because we are very, very, very different in every single way. The way we respond to stress, the way we respond to conflict, the way we like to be, confronted, the way in which we make decisions. I'm in the boat where, probably like you, Lanny, a decision needs to last about that long and it's good enough and we can move forward with it and it's going to work because we'll all make it work. Whereas someone like my brother's on the other side who could think about it for 6 months and really think about all the angles, et cetera, et cetera. And, for some of us, that's just super frustrating, right? But of course, I can learn from that too, because time after time after time, he would think about different angles that I hadn't seen from the first time. And he saved us tons of heartache because we just thought about it for a little bit longer. You know what I mean? So like things like that, you start to learn that we are a body, and like every part of the body. So if we say it like this, every part around this circle of the Enneagram is the body, and every part is unbelievably helpful and useful, right? And so learning to meet people where they're at on the body, wherever And even though I made clear to say, like, we're talking about the old self here, that's fine because we still have to operate in the world. But this is where, if I can just say one more thing here, I know we're running out of time. One person that I know whom I worked with this, it was precisely through gaining clarity and awareness of all of these things that rather than it reinforcing for them their old self, it gave them the clarity and the awareness to be able to know and to be able to say, this is not who I am, and this is not who I want to be and how I want to be. So I've continually found that if somebody is open and willing to actually live from, the Christ mind, or from a space of their true self in Christ, this tool just basically helps to kind of pry our fingers off all of the things that we had been holding on to so tightly. And when doing that, and like I've said several times, it helps to release some of the power of it and allows it to dissipate, and I think allows spirit to help. Anyway, that was a lot more than what you said, Lanny, but I really appreciated what you said there. Here, let me.
Ryan,
Oh yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No.
It made me laugh a minute ago when you were talking about the different personalities between you and your brother. Well,
Mhm.
it's like that with me and my husband. My
Mhm.
husband is the one that, he's like the visionary. He's the one that says, oh, there's an idea. Let's
Mhm.
do that right now. And then
Mhm.
I'm the one that comes behind him and goes, "Mm-mm.
Yeah.
Breathe. Let's take a step. Okay,
Yeah.
we need to look at the details of
That's
this.
it.
So I'm the one that come in. He's like, okay, well, this is the idea. This is what I want. This is how I want to do it. Here you go.
Mm.
And so then I'm the one that comes in and says, okay, now let's think about this. A plus B does not equal C right now. So let's try to make that work. In other words, if we both came and went into like a swimming pool, he would be the one that goes, oh my God, it's time to swim, and just run and jump in the pool. I'm the one that would go put my foot in the water first and let me check the temperature. Is the chlorine measured out correctly, to the water ratio, So it just made me think about that when you said that about your brother, because
Yeah.
but it's what makes us work though
Yeah.
as a couple,
Yeah.
because which is really weird. It makes us work as a couple because, like I said, and we didn't get there overnight, of course, but it's like, yeah, he's the visionary. I mean, the stuff, he's very creative. The things that he come up with, I'm like, I would never have thought of that, but okay. And so that's where we are. He thinks about it and then he hands it off to me. There you go, make it happen.
Yeah.
Okay. But
Yeah.
yeah, that's what makes us work.
That's great. Yeah, no, thanks for sharing that. Um, uh, Two thoughts on that, just to say, um, I think a lot of us would resonate with you with our significant others being somewhat opposite or somewhat different in particular ways.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
and so I mean, I appreciate you saying that for that reason. Also, one of the things that's really helpful to note, and I know is, like we've been saying here, one of the illusions that we tend to operate under because of this significant other who's with us, who is so opposite than us, is we tend to operate with, well, I am this way, I'm not like you, you are this way, you're not like me. And while I'm with you 100%, it makes for a really good team, and it really does, as long as you're able to see where it is that you trigger each other, etc.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but specifically, what's helpful about that, and as you know, is part of the purpose of relationships. I would say the whole purpose, but part of the purpose of especially significant other relationships is that they are once again mirroring back to you what you have within yourself that you have chosen not to practice or look at. And so that's both strengths and weaknesses, right? So like strengths, the
Yeah.
part of you that would want to say, I'm not as visionary as him. It's like, well, yeah, 100%. He has practiced that way more than you have. So it's like drawing
Yeah.
with your left hand, but at the same time, that is within you. And part of why he's there is to show you that this is within you, so that you can
Yeah.
be able to grow in that area as well. And same for him, vice versa. You get what I'm saying?
Exactly. Yes, I agree. Yes.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thanks for that example. That was a super good example.
Sure.
Let me just hit 6 really quick, and I know we're basically out of time. The intelligence centers, I just wanted to hit this really quick because one of the things that is a gift about the Enneagram as well, though it comes from the Christian wisdom tradition and Hermetic tradition anyway, and it's that we all operate with 3 intelligence centers. And I think we've talked about this before, but of course, and this is scientifically accurate. This has always been spiritually the way that people have seen things, even in the Judeo tradition, where you have your head, which is the thinking intelligence center, and you have your heart, which is the feeling emotions intelligence center, or the seat of all of the electromagnetic activity of your body. And then you have your gut, which is your instinctual or gut feeling / intuitive center, but also related to your body center. And of course, we all know now, I think, that we actually do have brains in each of those areas of our body. So that has been confirmed in so many different ways, which is great. But there also are key energy centers. So anyway, it is that way for so many different reasons. But what's so helpful about that to know is part of where your type falls helps you to see which of those energy centers you're dominant in and which you have neglected, for lack of better words. And normally it doesn't take a genius to say, do you go into your head? Do you go into your feelings? Or do you go into your body in terms of action, et cetera, when something triggers you or when you're having to make a decision? I think we all know right away what we do, right? So the primary thing about these dynamics is that you can just say it this way. Imagine how effective and whatever word you'd like to use there, brilliant you would be if rather than using one intelligence center and you made the other ones offline, if you brought the other ones online as well, and you had 3 intelligence centers and you operated from all 3 all the time. Imagine how much, sorry, I got a call there. Imagine how much more intelligence you would operate from. Like not just from your mind thinking intelligence, but you would operate from an intuitive knowing intelligence and operate from an action intelligence that you would know what is appropriate to do in that given moment, and operate from a feeling intelligence and awareness of what people are feeling and what the emotional state of that person or the room is. Imagine if you operated with all 3 of those all the time. I think we would make way less mistakes. We would also have a way more highly attuned ability of paying attention to what it is that person really needs right now. How can I bless that person? Your awareness of what is going on with that person enables you to be able to bless them in the particular way that they need it, to love them in the particular way they need it at that time, and just to say, contrary to that, on the other side of that is if you're highly developed in your thinking center, I'll just say like I am, and I've been highly repressed in my feeling center, my heart center, which is part of why I do all the practices that have you go into the heart space, because that's been developing that for me, et cetera, et cetera. But the primary thing is my spouse is 100% operative in her heart center and less so in her head center. Of course, it's like that.
She's
So
a
in that
female.
way, of course, I'm sorry.
She's a female.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, those are the dominants
Yeah.
for each. But what is so helpful for that of knowing that for me is that rather than just saying, okay, the heart level is your job, you do that. I don't need to worry about that. I'll be up here. I'll be the brains of our family. You be the heart of our family. That's not going to be helpful for anybody, because of course, when it comes down to even her and I interacting, if there's something that we need to talk about or some whatever, and I come at it from this angle and she comes at it from this angle, we're going to move just like that every single time, right? So again, for me, learning to develop in this area has gone, I mean, I'll let her tell you, but I've come a long ways in the last 4 years of us being able to meet at a level that is more helpful for her. And then same with her, coming along with utilizing her thinking center, which she had repressed for a lot of different reasons, when we can meet on at least two different pistons working at the same time, the ability for us to actually communicate well and clearly and help each other feel known and loved, etc., goes through the roof, as opposed to just working with one of them. That's just a simple example, but that's one of the brilliant things about this as well. I'll pause there. Any thoughts?
So I'm sorry to speak up so much, but so what you just said to me is that I have permission to be more than I am.
100%. Yes. You have all the permission in the world, / you are here to be the fullness of every single one of those types. And that is a tall order for most of us from where we're standing right now. And I'll speak for myself, but it is a bit of while it feels like a task, it's a bit of a joy as well to know that I can open up into being someone who is much more, like you said, Nancy, much more feminine by way of being able to operate from that feeling, emotive heart center. Ryan in that way would be a very different Ryan than I was several years ago, who was 100% up here, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, the fullness, the possibilities of that growth are unending. And yes, 100%. We all have the permission to do that. Thanks for saying that, Nancy.
And just to add a little bit to that, if I might,
Yeah.
you're not familiar with the Enneagram, within each of those numbers, even at the basic level, there is a continuum that goes from very healthy to very sick. And so within the broad spectrum, there is a goal to achieve and trying to put on the mind of Christ to move toward the healthiest of that particular indicator.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well said. Thanks for that, Lanny. It's really good. Well, just really quick on this. This is not a big deal, and I know we're out of time. Some of you are already very familiar with all this, but for those of you who maybe were not familiar with it and you're keen to better understand where you fall on how you lead from both the type and the subtype, et cetera, et cetera. Of course, I gave you that general overview packet, and some of you who are intuitive enough and also clear enough, self-aware enough, you'll be able to find yourself on that if you just read through all those. And there's many a person who says that's the best way to do it. I agree to an extent. Like for somebody who's halfway self-aware, it is usually pretty easy to find yourself on one of those. The thing that I would say, and this is not, you can do whatever you want. Through the IEQ-9, so I just wanted to say this about them, just so that because there's a lot of tests out there. You could take a test if you want. It works for some people. But the IEQ-9 is the only test that is research-based, and they've utilized all of their data that they've collected. And that's one of the reasons I appreciate these people is, of course, being largely a head center person. They are not okay to just take information from books. All of their data has come from all of their research that they've done. And the way that their test works, if you get on to take one, of course, it costs more than I think pretty much most tests, but it's worth it. It's worth every single penny of it because of what you get out of it is way more than every other test. And it's more accurate. So what they've done in their test is they've created a database of questions that it's way more than that. I think they're at 2,000 something questions now, to where every question that you answer, it has a bank of questions that it will automatically put as to the next question by question, what your next one will be. And it's based upon your previous answer. And so what it's systematically doing is systematically eliminating particular ones of them and systematically trying to tune in as finely as it possibly can to the particular subtypes and all the other dynamics that go with it. I don't personally know of another test that does that. I'll be honest, like our organization researched a ton of different organizations that do Enneagram stuff. And this is the only one that, one, does their own research, and two, has a auto path selection test. So they claim that it's 97% accurate. I will just give my honest feeling about it or opinion. It turns out I had typed myself and with other tests completely wrong for my whole life until I took this test, and then gained an enormous amount of clarity as to why I was not that type that I thought I was for all these years. And anyway, all the pieces kind of came together and it was very illuminating. And so my personal feeling towards it is that it's worth every bit of it. I will be honest and say, like, if you do it, I would be very happy to like get on with you on Zoom or something, and we could just walk through your report and such, because they give a ton of information, almost like, you know, for some people it may be too much. And we could just walk through if you wanted to do that, just for it to be maximally helpful. But if not, that's fine too. But I just wanted to put that there. But for most of you, you'll be able to read that packet and you'll be able to identify kind of where you're at. But that packet doesn't have subtypes. So just so you know that, if you wanted to think about the subtypes, which is super helpful, then this would be the place to go. But anyway, I'm not trying to get you to do this or to do anything, but I just want to let you know what option you have there. Let me pause there. I know we're at 7:04. Does anyone have any comments or anything from today before we close up?
I just wanted to thank you for the class. I think it's just been excellent, outstanding. I've really enjoyed and benefited.
Well, thank you, Lanny. I really appreciate that. Yeah.
I agree.
Well, thank y'all. I really appreciate that. I was gonna, in closing, say just how much I appreciate each one of you. It's been a real joy and a gift to get to spend this time with y'all every week for 13 weeks now. Those of you I knew before this, I loved you before this class, and I love you even more so after this class. And those of you who I didn't know, I 100% love you after this class. And I'm just so grateful for each one of you and for your willingness to engage in all these conversations and willingness to do the readings and the homeworks and everything like that. So I take all of that much more like you gave your willingness, and I trust, and I've trusted this whole time that Spirit has worked in some way for you. Whether or not all the content was helpful is I'm gonna put that to rest and just trust that in some way it could be helpful as you move forward. So wanted to say thanks to all of you. If any other thoughts, if not, I'll just close this with a prayer here. Okay, let me close this with a prayer. Father, we're so grateful for each person who's here and each person who's been a part of this class and a part of the conversations that we've got to experience. And we know and feel that our minds, through discussions, that our minds have increased in our ability to articulate some of these things that we've talked about, and that our hearts have grown in our ability to see each person, not just in this class, but in our life in a way in which you see them. And we know that you are constantly in every moment of each day giving us the gifts and the teachers and the ability to choose differently, to see as you see. And we ask that you do that as we continue to move forward from this class, as we go through our week, as we go into Thanksgiving, as we go into Christmas season, where we spend more time with our family. Would you teach us through our times with our family to extend to them the truth of who they are? Would you help us to no longer see them as the box that we have seen them in? Would you help us to learn to see them differently and to extend the truth of who they are to them? Teach us to love them in the way that is most helpful and appropriate for them. We thank you. We know that you have already done all these things, and you have already healed and forgiven. And we're so grateful for that. We pray a blessing on each person who's here. And we pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Ron.
Thank you.
Thank
Welcome.
you, Ryan.
Yep, hope you feel better.
Thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate it.
Yes, get to feeling better.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Okay. Love you all. Goodbye then.
Love you too.